All right, guys, so now we're going to talk about short-term changes. Those are going to be less than 6 months that they affect the environment. So like a drought, so that's very, very little water. Smog, which is a mixture of smoke and fog that usually results for the pollution over a city. Flooding, volcanic eruption. I would say volcanic eruption could be a little bit of both. Depending on the severity of their eruption, a blizzard, and pollution. And then there's long-term, which is going to be more than 6 months. We've got ice age, deforestation, that's where we chop down all the trees. Urbanization, where we start to build buildings and stuff. Global warming, extinction of species, radioactive waste, / pollution. So how that affects the changes, again, long-term is 6 months or more. Those animals are going to, I actually didn't change this examples because those are going to be all, up here and stuff. So I wanted to write about how that affects the organisms. So they can either migrate, if it's long-term, they can either migrate away and find a new permanent home. And they do have increased competition because wherever their new home is, those other organisms are going to have to compete with limited resources as well. They can either adapt. Adaptation does take a very long time. This is where natural selection occurs, where you have some species, some individuals that may have an slight advantage in that particular area that has now changed, and those are going to survive and keep going, whereas the other ones would die. And for short-term environmental changes, less than 6 months, these will migrate for a short period of time. So, for instance, when geese fly south for the winter, or birds fly south for the winter, and they come back, or they can adapt as well. All right, number 5, Galveston Bay, an estuary in southeast Texas, is shown below. So an estuary is this little area over here. It's kind of like, if you've ever been down to the coast, it's as right along as you're going to the beach. It has the amount of salt water changes with the tide. So if it's a high tide, it's going to have a lot of salt water, where if it's low tide, it's probably mostly fresh water. But it's so sometimes the water is mostly fresh water, and sometimes it's mixed with salt water. Various plant species live in this environment and provide a habitat for other organisms. So to live successfully in an estuary, in this area that has both salt and fresh water, a plant species must have an adaptation that will allow it to, well, A, produce large amounts of food. Well, that's not really going to help it if it's within that salt and fresh water. Absorb large amounts of water. Well, it's basically a water, it's almost like a swamp kind of area. So they don't really need to absorb that much because they've got plenty. Store excess gases. We're looking for something with salt. So all that excess salt that they would filter, they need to filter that out so they don't die, because most plants cannot live in a high salt environment. How can you determine when summer is on a diagram? And then, okay, so here we have, let's just say, here's my sun. On a diagram, you usually have a total of 4 Earths around like this. Okay, so summer and winter is always going to be the starting point. I would say 98% of the time, unless it's actually indicated on the actual paper itself, you're never going to find winter and summer here. Okay, those are usually always going to be either fall or spring. So your winter and summer are always going to be on the sides. So if we're talking about in the northern hemisphere, and then we're going to say that because that's where we live, so we're only looking at this area right here, okay, and this area right here. So if it is summer over here, because look at this little tilt right here. Here's our axis. Our axis is tilted with 23.5 degree tilt, and it is tilted kind of towards, it's not directly at it, it's just tilted towards the sun. So because it's tilted towards the sun, you have more daylight hours, and that's going to warm up the air. So this is going to be tilted toward sun. So we know it's summer because it's tilted towards the sun. On the other hand, over here, this one right here, this, again, northern hemisphere is tilted away from the sun. So we're going to have less daylight, day hours, about 9. And we're going to say it's tilted away from the sun. All right, next one. The types of small organisms that live on the bottom of streams can be good indicators of water pollution. The table below shows groups of some organisms by their tolerance of pollution. So this is tolerance. This word tolerance, it means like basically can it live or die? It's like can they handle it? So this one says cannot tolerate pollution. So if these guys cannot tolerate pollution, if there's pollution, they're going to die. Okay, these can tolerate pollution. So if there is pollution, they are going to live. So we're just going to go through each one of these, and it says a certain stream that was historically clear and clean has become increasingly polluted with fertilizer waste over the years. So it's definitely polluted. Which of these describes a likely result of this pollution? So what's basically going to happen in this stream because there's pollution now? Well, the mayflies that were previously abundant means basically plenty, okay, plentiful, means that there's a lot. Mayflies, so here are my mayflies, right here. There used to be a lot of them, but they are no longer present in the stream. Well, that's because there's pollution in there and they will die. So I like this one. I do want to go ahead and see if there's a better answer. Stoneflies and midges thrive and compete for the same food source. So stoneflies right here and midges are here. So they're thriving. Well, these guys are going to die. So stoneflies will die. Midges will do fine. So this one is wrong. Large numbers of crayfish have suddenly died. Here are my crayfish. Crayfish are going to live, and so they're not going to die. That one's wrong. Rifle beetles have become more abundant in the stream. Here are my rifle beetles right here. If there's pollution, these guys are going to die, so they're not going to become more abundant. They're going to die. So the correct answer was our first one, which is going to be F. Number 7, how many organisms in this food web eat only producers? Okay, guys, so this word again, producers. Producers produce their own food. Another word that you must know is the word autotroph. Okay, the word auto means self. That's self. The word troph means feed. So basically they feed themselves through the process of photosynthesis. All right, so we're basically looking, fancy word, autotroph and producers, we're looking for plants. So which ones are our plants? Well, this one says green plants, so I like that, so I know for sure that's a plant. I know what berries, fruits, and nuts are plants as well, but guys, really you never know if they could give it to you in a strange different language. What you need to look for is where all the energy is coming from, because producers always start the energy, and that energy start the energy in a food web. The energy in a food web. So because they start the energy, it all starts with them. Notice how all of these, the green plants and the berries, fruits, and nuts, all have arrows going out of them. There are no arrows going to them. And really, if there were arrows going to them, it would be the sun. But that's just assumed, and because that's the process of photosynthesis. But, so they typically do not put the sun there. We look for things that all of the energy starts from. So I'm just going to go through these now. White-tailed rabbit eats only green plants, so this one is going to be a herbivore or something that eats only producers. A mouse eats plants and berries, so this one as well. White-tailed deer eats plants and berries, this one as well. How about a raccoon? Raccoon does eat fruits and berries, but it also eats mice, so that makes it what we call an omnivore. So that is nothing. That one we do not count. A coyote eats rabbits, mice, raccoons, and deer. They don't even eat any producers, so this is what we would call a carnivore. So the ones that eat only, how many eat only plants or producers? It's going to be 3. Make sure that is the whole number, so it's going to go to the left of your decimal number. Baleen whales eat zooplankton by taking a large amount of water into their mouths. So baleen whales eat zooplankton. All right, these whales use special structures in their mouth to separate the zooplankton from the water. Because baleen whales eat zooplankton, they are classified as, well, producers are plants. They make their own food. Again, another fancy word that you must know is autotrophs. So, not a producer. Predator, well, the word zooplankton, there's 2 types of plankton. There's phytoplankton and there's zooplankton. One is a plant and one is an animal. The zooplankton is an animal, and you think of it by, like if you go to the zoo, you go to look at animals. And so it's a whale eating another animal. I do like the predator, so maybe. Parasite. It would not be considered a parasite because it keeps, parasite usually keeps its host alive, and it just kind of drains all of its energy by sucking away its energy a little bit at a time. So it's definitely not keeping it alive, so it's not a parasite. And then a host would be, again, part of the parasite that it's sucking the energy from. So the correct answer is B, predator. All right, so adaptations or traits or organisms that an organism has to survive or to better suit their environment, and they're classified into 2 main types. Structural, which means that those are their physical features. They can either be inside or outside. Feathers, for instance, fur to keep them warm, claws for protection, hollow bones to get them off the ground and keep them light, gills to help to filter out the dissolved oxygen in water, and scales to help them maybe be more aerodynamic. Then there are behavioral adaptations. These are things an organism does in order to survive. So, for instance, barking or growling to ward off enemies, arching their back to make them look bigger, mating calls, or even fighting for their mate, spraying or spitting different venom or blood, like that one blood lizard that spits blood. Hibernation or migration. These are things that they do in order to survive the changes they have in their environment. So, natural selection. Those are things that organisms that reproduce sexually. Because they have 2 moms and dads, have just slight differences. They call those genetic variations. Sometimes those genetic variations give them an advantage that help them to survive better than others that don't have that trait. Because they are able to survive better, they are able to grow older to reproduce. They reproduce and they pass that helpful trait onto their offspring. And so what happens over time, the population of that organism who possesses that helpful adaptation will increase. We did see that over here in 2 classic examples. We have Charles Darwin's Galapagos Island finches, where these birds were all from the same type of bird, and they were all separated, but their beaks were different. There's slight differences because of the food sources. So the larger beaks were more like hard acorns, whereas the smaller, skinnier beaks were digging out insects. And then we've got the Industrial Revolution peppered moths. Before the pollution over here, the lighter moths were higher in number, and the darker moths, because they were easily seen by predators, were very low in numbers. But then after the pollution happened, it kind of switched. Now the lighter ones were able to be seen by their predators more, and their numbers declined, whereas the darker ones were camouflaged and increased in number.